You're listening to Unfiltered, real talk about sex and love with Ashley
and Heather. Today, we're going to be talking about where to turn after sexual betrayal, because this is one of the things that we have heard from a lot of women who really don't understand where they can find help after the disclosure or discovery of their husband's sexual betrayal. So we're going to dig into that today.
We know that life is busy, and for me, when discovery hit, it just felt like more to do on top of what I already had to do. I'm a mom, I'm running a household, and so we deliberately keep these episodes short and we get straight to the point. We want women to feel like they can come and get their questions answered without having to be tied down to a really long episode. And so if you want to know the backstory and who we are, where we're from, and what we do, then I encourage you to go listen to the first episode to learn more about us.
So our first question today is, I'm nervous about telling anyone what's really happening in my marriage. Where can I find safe people? And I think that this is a really common question, not only among women in the church, but I think sometimes in the secular world as well. We just kind of feel trapped in our situation, and especially when it comes to issues that have to do with our marriage relationship, issues that have to do with sex, especially sexual betrayal. And so I think that finding safe people is really more about finding people who are experiencing kind of the same thing that you are. Because I know that I can go, and I went to a pastor in my church to try and explain what was happening in my first marriage, and I was met with really unhelpful, unhealthy advice. And so finding safe people is really going to be about finding other women who maybe are experiencing betrayal trauma, who maybe have experienced it, and those are going to be the safe people that you can talk to. And at Pure Desire, of course, we have groups for women like this. We have Betrayal and Beyond, which is specifically written for women who have experienced disclosure or discovery, and they're really trying to figure out what their whole entire healing journey is supposed to look like. And so that's really, for us, that's a great place that we recommend women start.
Right. And I just want to highlight, we have groups online. So you can either go to our website, puredesire.org, and you can click join a group, and you can look at the map and put in your zip code, and it will pull up a 100-mile radius to see what groups are in your area. And if that's not an option, then we do have really great online groups that are safe, no more than 7 people in them. Usually, I don't think there's ever hardly any more than 7. And they start to end, it's the same women. And it's almost always the leader who's been there, who understands. You can borrow her hope. And it's just a really safe community. So for me, online groups work out really well just because I'm a mom. And so even in the summer, I can get up at 6 a.m. and join a group and be done before my kids are even out of bed. And the reason why I even emphasize this and try not to sound sales pitchy, but the reason why is because it's so crucial that you have something for yourself, even though you don't understand why you would need it when it's not your problem. And I know so many of us have thought, well, if he quits cheating, if he quits looking at porn, we wouldn't have all this going on. But some of the damage has already been done, or just giving you language to know how to go forward with somebody who's struggling. Because if you're in a relationship with your spouse, your husband, that's not going to be a quick process. It's not, I quit porn and then everything's better. It's going to be a 3 to 5 year process for him to be recovered and to gain that sobriety and that health that he's looking for. And so you're going to need your own support and your own tools and your own language to walk alongside that, and your own healing from any trauma that you're experiencing. But you know, Heather, you talked about the church, and I did all the things wrong when, I mean, I was trying, bless my heart. I did all the things wrong though, because I did go to the church, felt more shame. Then I started feeling like I am the reason why I'm not healing. Because when the church tells you to don't go down, don't let the sun go down without forgiveness. When they tell you pray the armor of God over yourself every morning to protect your heart and your mind. When they tell you to be in scripture more, when they tell you to just submit and be more sexual, or, don't withhold sex, and you're doing all the things that you're advised to from your church. And I love the church, do not hear me wrong, but when it's not working for the pain you're feeling, then you start to wonder, I must not have enough faith to move mountains. I must not be sexual enough. I must not be pretty enough. I must not be forgiving enough. I must not be reading the right scripture. I'm doing it wrong. I'm trying to pray the armor of God over myself. And so I ended up feeling like a failure as a Christian wife. Like there was something I was doing that was keeping my healing stuck. So then I go and tell my friends, they don't understand sexual addiction. And so, yeah, they were probably the safest people because they didn't say anything damaging to me, but there wasn't the help I needed. And then I tried desperately again to like, somebody needs to help us. And so I told John, you have to tell your parents. And that was like a mistake. It was a mistake because one, they weren't equipped to help in this area. And two, we didn't know at the time that so many of his struggles were coming from childhood shame and pain. And so then by me saying you have to tell your parents, because I was just like desperate for somebody to come alongside us and help us and be involved in what we're going through. So it wasn't just him and I like fed him back to his childhood trauma, and it really just made things worse. And now we're good. Like now we can talk about things openly with his parents. But at the time, I needed to go to people that wouldn't shame us. I needed to go to people that knew what sexual addiction was, that knew what betrayal trauma was, so they could guide us in a healthy way. And that's why groups are so important, because if you don't have those people in your life that you've been able to share all the ugliness, all the pain in your life, and they've met you with safe responses, then you can come to Pure Desire and we can offer that to you through a group experience.
You had mentioned the online groups as a really great place to find help. And this can be especially important if your spouse is a church leader, if your spouse is the pastor or has a prominent place or role in the church, and the last thing you want to do is, ruin your husband, but yet you desperately need help. Another place, instead of being able to go to a church where in your community that might be too risky, but online groups is a great place. So where you have more anonymity and where you can just find the support that you need, but yet you don't feel like you're, betraying your husband and his position in the church.
Because all of that. It's a lot to weigh in the beginning of, if I step forward for help as the betrayed spouse, does this one make me look like I failed as a spouse? Why was I not good enough? Will it make people assume he's some predator that needs to be locked up, some pedophile that needs to be locked up? Like all these things are going through your head. Will he lose his job? I stay home with the kids. I homeschool. What happens if my husband loses his job? There's so much, and you just shouldn't even be sifting through that alone. And so, yes, all those questions need to be answered and they all need to be addressed, and all the pain and fear around it need to be addressed, but do it with people who understand and can help support you through those questions. Okay, our next question is, my husband won't get help. What do I do? This question, and just any question in this vein of like, he won't do what's on the recovery action plan, he won't get help, he won't join a group, he won't honor my recovery action plan. All those questions are so hard to answer because there's only so much we have control over. And so our answer is going to be what you're able to do for yourself. And then you kind of come to this point where you're at a fork in the road and you have a couple choices. I mean, I like to say, if you get yourself healthy and you, let's say, join a Betrayal and Beyond group or get counseling with somebody who is trained and experienced in betrayal trauma specifically, then you can at least start figuring this out, because nobody can just give you an answer of what to do to get your husband to join a group or to work on his recovery, or nobody can give you an answer on whether to stay in your marriage or go. These are all very, very hard, complex answers. And the best thing you can do for yourself is get yourself in a situation where you have somebody navigating the day in and the day out, because it's usually not just one thing. It's, how do I communicate my needs to my spouse? How do I put in boundaries?
Yes.
What about sex? Do I have to have sex when he's still looking at porn or having an affair? There's so many questions within that one question that you're going to need a whole group, a whole counseling process to navigate these. And a lot of times what we see is when one person changes, it does force the other person to change, good or bad. I can't say, we hope for the good. But it's one of those situations where it's like paint or get off the ladder. Like, I'm going to go get healthy and I'm going to put these safeguards in to keep myself safe. And you can either respect those or you can leave. Like, I know that sounds so harsh, but that's where I had to get in my marriage. Whereas, like, I'm not going to keep doing this. It's very unhealthy for ourselves. It's unhealthy for our kids. And so I'm going to change, and you can either join me or our marriage is not going to look the same. That's the realistic answer I can give. It's not the easiest answer. When I found out about John, I did basically tell him, like, you have to join a group. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. For me to say, in order for us to even have a chance, in order for me to feel safe, I need to see you in a group, doing work, in counseling. And so that is okay to at least verbalize what you need in that marriage. Whether they do it or not is going to be ultimately up to them.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really tough place for a wife to be at when basically you're saying, we should do this. Our marriage is broken. Our marriage is not going to survive this, and we need help. And your spouse is saying, well, I don't think I need help. I don't want to get help. I don't want to go to a group. I don't want to do all these things. And what we constantly encourage women is that to get healing for yourself, because this is the piece of the puzzle that you can control, that you want to do not only for your own emotional and mental health, but even for you as a mom to just be able to navigate that I have this part of my life that seems to be incredibly unhealthy. And that's just going to be a variable that I'm going to deal with when the time comes. But then how am I going to continue to move forward or continue to find an area of health where I can survive as a mom, even as a wife in the midst of this chaos. And that was one of the things that was so useful when we went through the betrayal trauma training, is just to recognize that for the partner, for the betrayed partner, all of the physical responses, the symptoms that they're going to have, and just being able to calm their mind, and not only to find an area where they're safe, but then what does it look like for me to move forward in a way that helps me to feel stable in my life. And even if that means, what do I need to do to feel financially safe? Or what do I need to feel not only emotionally safe and physically safe, but what do I even need to feel spiritually safe, and be able to work that out with somebody, like you said, who's been, trained in this area of sexual addiction and betrayal trauma, and then just really get a feel of that last phase of what is this going to look like then for my marriage after I've gone through all of the steps to feel safe and to feel stable. What does it look like to pursue reconciliation if that's going to be something that's going to happen in the marriage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I knew I needed to make a change for myself, because it's so hard when you're in the moment, when you realize your husband has been having an affair or looking at porn or visiting prostitutes. It doesn't make sense that you then need to go get help. It's so hard to understand that you need support, or you need this long 10-month group or this expensive counseling process. It's very hard to wrap your brain around that. But what I noticed, the moment I noticed I needed help, it was probably, discovery happened in June, and this was probably December. So 6 months went by of if you would fix yourself, we wouldn't have these issues. But because I was so paralyzed in pain, I was lashing out in anger at my children because they were the safe people. They weren't going to leave me. They weren't going to go act out. They weren't going to, it's sad. It's sad, but it's the truth that I would hold things in and feel so traumatized around John. And then he'd go to work and I was just like this short fuse. I had nothing left. I was depleted. And so I was very snappy with my kids. And I remember a point of John just saying, you need support. You need to get help. And I was mad at him. I'm like, don't tell me what I need. I don't need help. And then it just kind of sat with me after he left of like, but who's suffering? Like, my kids are suffering. I'm suffering. I hate feeling like this. And that was the moment that I started to pursue getting help. And it's really hard. It's really sad. And it's really hard to have to try to explain this over and over and find the proper help. But what it became is this anchor and this safe place. Like I think you said, stabilization. And so this was all chaotic, up and down, every day, all day, as we're working through what recovery looks like for John. And then I could go to group, and it's just this breath of like fresh air and sanity and clarity, so I could enter back into that week knowing how to engage enough to help my marriage, but disengage where I needed to disengage and not own that and not let John's actions completely derail my day.
Right. And that's the other thing, too, about having that support of a group of women who are all working toward healing, is that you have them as a constant resource, too. That if you're just having a bad day where you can't stop crying, or you keep yelling at your kids, or you just have this fogginess around you, that you can reach out to them to just talk you through some things, pray with you, give you a next steps plan to just make it to the next day. Because sometimes it is a day by day process.
Right. I mean, how many times did I text you like 8 years ago, like, I swear, I'm going crazy. And that was so good, because before I had group, I would harass John. I was the follower. I'm the pursuer. He's the fleer in stress, and I'm the pursuer. So he's running and I'm chasing. And then it's like, it just ends up being worse. And then I basically get in trouble for following him and not giving him his space. And then I'm left feeling like I shouldn't have done that. And now the stress I'm feeling is around an issue that wasn't even the original issue, because I didn't know how to have a conversation with him. And he was not in the mental or emotional place to have that conversation. So once I started having people where I could vent all my thoughts in my true Ashley fashion and then distill it down to what I needed to actually address with John, things got so much easier for me.
Mm-hmm. And it is really only by the grace of God that 8 years later that we can actually maybe laugh about this, because I remember those days too. Yeah, that it was just so painful and so hard, and just this constant chatting or texting or whatever to just get through the next phase.
So I know there's women listening who they have a husband like me, where when they're in stress and they're not very healthy at the moment, their go-to is stonewalling. Mm-hmm. And so for me, who has a core wound of abandonment, whether that's physical or emotional abandonment, because my mom had a tendency to check out mentally, to be in the same space but not there mentally, then I always feared I can't articulate this to John, because anything I say could be a trigger for him to emotionally withdraw, and then I'll be emotionally abandoned again. And so having friends and support was a lifeline for that.
So our last question is this long, expensive process going to fix anything when I'm not the one with the problem? And we've kind of talked about that a little bit, because it is really one of those areas where we have to be able to recognize that the person who's struggling with the sexual addiction or compulsive sexual behaviors, they are their own person, but their behaviors have impacted us, the way we think, feel, and behave, in a way that we never could have imagined, that we never thought possible. And in many cases, it's something that we've never experienced before. And so the way that women sometimes will say, I can't stop crying, or all of a sudden they start swearing. I've heard this from not only from women, but also the partners or the spouses who have said, you know what, my wife, she was this really quiet, compassionate, sensitive woman. And once discovery happened and disclosure happened, she became this like swearing like a sailor woman who I've never even seen before. But it's because of the way that the betrayal was impacting her. And so I think that that's part of this process is, will it fix the problem? We can't say for sure, because we don't know all of the details that are going on in your relationship. But what I do know is that, will this help to fix you? Will this help to bring you to a place where you can feel peace and joy and love and appreciation someday? Absolutely. But it's not going to be something that happens overnight. And it's going to be something that really, the more that you pour into it, the more that you're willing to do the hard work to face some of the issues that you're experiencing because of betrayal, the better off you're going to be. But I know that I've been at conferences where, I'll never forget this one, where a woman came up to me and said, you know what, it's been 4 years. He's been doing all the work. You know, we've been going to group, we've been going to counseling, and I shouldn't feel this way. But who says that 4 years is the magic mark? Who says that in 4 years it's going to fix everything that has transpired in the relationship? And so my encouragement to you would be just to really give yourself time and space and grace, and it's going to take as long as it's going to take, for you to get healthy, for you to figure out what it looks like to move forward, and then to wrap in what it's going to look like for both of you, husband and wife, to pursue healing together.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think, we've described it before in a way of like, okay, if you're in an accident and your husband's the driver, but you've been injured, yes, you did not cause this, but you may have been injured by his actions. And it's still important that you get care. And some women, I know for me, it was like, oh my gosh, is it going to take us 5 years to get back to normal? It just feels like forever and you don't know if you can do it. But what I will say is you see these small changes along the way at day 30, at day 60, day 90. If you're actually both working, or if it's just you and it's one-sided, you'll start to see these changes, and that gives you so much hope. So even though it's this process, you still start to feel better. Just like going back to that injury with the car accident, it's like, your leg may not be healed, but once it's bandaged and stabilized, it feels so much better, so that you can then move on to the deeper healing that needs to take place. We've talked about questions that are based around one-sided healing, and we did a full episode of this. Our team put out an episode called One-Sided Healing on the Pure Desire podcast. So if you want more on this, if you're in that situation where you're the only one working, then we'll drop that link for that episode in the show notes. So Heather, you talked about how when we're in betrayal, we can start doing things that just seem so out of character because of the trauma we're experiencing. And I swear that I have never hit John or cussed at him, but there was this moment in our recovery, in our healing, where I threw a purse, and my purse was huge back then because I had babies, and you remember those purses are like bowling ball bags. But I threw this purse at him, and he had cussed at me all within the same month. And it was like, that was stuff we did not do. Like, it was just not part of our relationship. And that scared us. And I remember talking with Dr. Ted, who's the founder of Pure Desire. We were sitting in the airport, and I was telling him about this, and he was saying, that is so normal. You guys are just, you're actually facing your issues rather than medicating them. And it's been called out. And so it's going to get a little ugly before it gets better. And I just remember I needed that. I needed to hear that my relationship wasn't getting worse because we were doing these groups, because we were doing counseling, that this was actually a little bit of the normal part of the process. And so that, again, is why having support and people who've done it before is important, because had I not had Dr. Ted to tell me that, I would have thought, this is getting worse. I should just shut my mouth again because it's getting worse. But it was because we were actually addressing what was under the surface. As the group's director, when people call and they're in crisis, right away, I'm thinking, which podcast episodes can I give them? And so we wanted these to be bite-sized so that if you have a friend or a family member who's going through this and you're like, this reminds me exactly what she just shared with me last week, you can send her this episode so she will know what she's going through is not uncommon, that she's not crazy, and that she's on the right path, and that everything she's experienced is a normal part of feeling betrayed. Thanks for being part of the conversation. If we can think about it, we should be talking about it. So send your questions to us at unfiltered@puredesire.org. And if you found this episode helpful, make sure to subscribe and share it with a friend.